Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that luncheon and the interesting program and speakers. My name is Gary Jastrab. I'm a member of the Volunteer Leadership Steering Committee and also a member of the UB Alumni Association Board of Directors. I'm pleased to welcome you to our first Insiders Perspective session, a student experience for the 21st century. First, let me introduce our moderator, Scott Weber. Scott is UB's Vice President for Student Life. He oversees efforts to provide close to 30,000 students with the resources that they need to thrive at the university and beyond. Scott is Professor of Civil, Structural, and Environmental Engineering in the UB School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And our panelists, Graham L. Hamill, who is Vice Provost for Graduate Education and Dean of the Graduate School. Liesl Folks, Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Lee Melvin, Vice Provost for Enrollment Management. Robin Schultze, Dean of the UB College of Arts and Sciences. And finally, Jacob Caldwell, a UB student. Welcome. Scott?
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Panel's got a great panel for you. I wanted to maybe share just a couple thoughts with you before we started. I'm relatively new in my role as the Vice President for Student Life, but I think I've collaborated a lot with that office over the years and certainly think a lot about the student experience. Recently, I was at the NCAA Games that were here in Buffalo, and I had a really unique opportunity to sit down and talk to Mark Emmerich, the president of NCAA. It was a really unique opportunity, and we were watching Wisconsin and Virginia Tech warm up, which was the late game, and I went to Virginia Tech, so I was, of course, rooting for Virginia Tech. And but we were looking at the Wisconsin team, and Mark said something really provocative to me. He said, you know, there's nothing in the NCAA rules that say that the players that are playing for Wisconsin have to live on campus, or when I say live on campus, be in-place students. They could be all online. And I thought that was really interesting. And what his point, though, was he said, well, what does that mean? And he says, really what it means is the experience that our students have on campus. And he wasn't talking about Wisconsin in particular, he was talking about every team. That they could all have been online students and flown them in for the game. And I just never even have given that a thought. And what he talked to me about was, because he knew I had just taken on this role, was that the sort of student experience is really going to be the differentiator for college campuses as they move into this 21st century, and we're obviously already in it, but as we move through the first, if you will, couple decades. And that sort of stuck with me. It made me think a lot about that. The other thing, I was at a talk with my good colleague Barbara Cotta, who's here in the audience. I was at a talk at NASPA, and one of our keynote speakers talked about the 5 most important things that they thought about in their life. What were the 5 pivotal moments? And I've actually encouraged a lot of my staff as well as my children and other things, and that's going to change all through your lives. But, you know, trying to limit it to what are the 5 most sort of pivotal decisions, moments, or whatnot that you have in your life. And it was sort of an interesting exercise. And for me, one of the very clear 5 points was the day that I decided that I was going to be a co-op student at Virginia Tech, which meant that I was going to leave the campus and go to work full-time, come back to campus, be a student full-time, go to work full-time. And I wasn't a Finish in 4 student, I was a Finish in 5 student. And yet that decision, that day, that moment, actually turned to be the pivotal decision almost so much of my professional career and many other ways. So these experiences really, you don't know when the experience is going to happen, you don't know what the experience is going to be because they are different for every student, they're different for almost every member of our staff and professionals in terms of our faculty, but we know they're critical. So we've assembled a team today that's going to give different perspectives on that. We have the real good fortune, if you will, to have people who've been on campus for a while, some that have just arrived, obviously academic leadership, people that are responsible on this campus for recruiting the very best and brightest of our students, and one of those very best and brightest students that's on the panel. Now, what I did was I asked them to think about a couple questions, and they're going to make a couple opening statements, each of them, and we can, maybe Graham, we'll go the other way. We'll start at your end and come this way, because I would like Jake to finish up with that. And then we're going to open the opportunity for you to ask questions, and if everybody's shy, which I know you won't be, I've got a few questions in the bank to ask him to provoke a little more thought. So with that, does that sound like a plan to everybody? Okay, so that's great. So Graham, if you could have some thoughts that you wanted to share, that'd be great.
I will, and this is okay? All right. So I'm going to share some thoughts about student experience for the 21st century, specifically from the perspective of graduate students. And that's a bit different from undergraduates who come for sort of a campus experience, and people will develop that idea, I'm sure, as we go on. Graduate students, I think, come or pursue graduate degrees for a combination of two reasons. One is students have a passion for really deep, specialized disciplinary knowledge. I know when I went to graduate school, when I decided to get a PhD in English, I had no idea what I was going to do with that, but I knew that I really wanted to know more about English literature. Second reason, and I think this was probably true for me, although I may not have admitted it at the time, I think people go to graduate school because they have a strong drive towards professional success. As people who go to graduate school tend to be ambitious, even if, probably like me, they didn't admit it at the time. And professional success might mean a number of different things, like becoming a great lawyer or a great doctor or a great social worker or a teacher, or it might mean becoming an outstanding academic researcher and teacher or a researcher in industry. So I mean professional pretty broadly. I think that the current challenge that we face in graduate education is that what it means to be a professional right now is undergoing dramatic change, and we don't know where it's headed. So if you think about what a professional meant in the 19th and 20th century, what you're talking about is a body of expert knowledge, like law or medicine or what have you, that's invested in a person who we think has high ethical standards, who delivers that knowledge to society. So as an example, I mean, this just to give a concrete example, if in the old worldview, if I wanted to do my taxes aren't that complicated, but tax law is, so I would go to an accountant and have that person with expert knowledge deliver this service to me, and everybody's happy. In this new world that we live in, two things have changed. The one is that expert knowledge is now much more publicly available. So I can go onto WebMD and get really worried about whatever illness I might think I now have. The second problem, or the second change, is that professional services are now delivered increasingly through computers and smartphones based on algorithms, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And these are things I don't completely understand, but when I read about algorithms and artificial intelligence and machine learning, what I find out is that it is increasingly possible to deliver higher and higher and higher levels of service, moving from the simply routinized to, in fact, pretty sophisticated forms of service. So now if I want to do my taxes, I can go online and get them done pretty quickly, and people are experimenting with things like online delivery of therapy. At the university, people are experimenting with algorithms that help teach students mathematics, and these algorithms are highly successful. This is a very successful way of delivering services. So what is this? And the other thing I would say is we don't know where this is going, but we know that things are changing. So what does this say about what students need for 21st century training? I would say there are three things. I'll be really brief, and I'm happy to develop any of these as you want. The first is that students need more interdisciplinary training. The kind of sort of silo training that I was trained in, and probably everyone in this panel was trained in, is just not going to cut it anymore. The second is that we need to deliver smaller chunks of highly specialized skills, and these smaller chunks need to be certified. Certification is a way for us as a university to put our imprimatur on training and to signal to employers that that if you've received this training from UB, you've reached a certain level of expertise. Smaller chunks are important because they allow for creative assemblages, and they should be unexpected assemblages. So English students should be taking courses in data curation, for example, or have smaller degrees in data curation. Smaller chunks are really important because it acknowledges that graduate and professional school is extremely expensive, and we should deliver education as cheaply as possible. That doesn't just mean tuition discounting, it also means efficient movement through the educational experience. And the other thing that's really important about smaller chunks is that small chunks meet the needs of people with bachelor's degrees who are already working, who don't have the time to pursue a 30-plus credit degree. So first thing, more interdisciplinary training. Second thing, need for smaller chunks of certified knowledge, specialized knowledge. And the third thing that I think is really important for graduate and professional education is that we need to have a stronger and more consistent dialogue and partnership between academics and non-academics. On the academic side, we need a stronger sense of what it's like to be in the world, the career world and the employment world right now. There's a lot of research on this, but I'm persuaded that if we in academics don't have an experiential point of view, if we don't know what it's like to be in the career world right now, we're not going to be able to deliver the highest level of programming to our students. From the other point of view, though, I think it's really important for us to be, for non-academics to understand what we as academics and institutions of higher education can and cannot deliver. I think there are a lot of expectations put on us, rightly so. Some are really legitimate, and some we should be in conversation about. I guess the last thing I would say, and hopefully I'm within my time, I'll be very brief here. So how can UB alumni help? And I think there are two key things that would matter. I think UB alumni are, in fact, our most important partners when it comes to understanding the current world of professional employment. So finding ways to engage in that conversation institution-wide and one by one is, I think, extremely important. The other thing I would say is I think UB alumni are really critical resources for our current students, both in helping our students network better, you're the people who can help create internships for our students, which provides experiential learning and practical kind of education, and also mentoring, which I think is really valuable for our graduate and professional students. So thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Robin?
My comments, because I'm the dean of the college that sees basically every single undergraduate student who comes through this institution. My comments are, I agree with everything Graham said, hook, line, and sinker, but my comments are really aimed at undergraduates. There's really no doubt that the students that we're seeing today are not the students that I saw when I first started my academic career in 1988. When I first started teaching teaching as a graduate student at the University of Michigan, my students had no cell phones, no tablets, no laptops. Cable TV was still an anomaly in its infancy. There was no email, no texting, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Snapchat. Most of our students still read the newspaper every morning. They worked in a computer lab if they needed a computer. They called their parents from landlines once a week, and they stood waiting in line in the dorms. Students today are part of the most connected and best entertained population in history. They are almost never alone. They document their lives with stunning detail, shaping and reshaping their identities for a wider public. They have grown up with an audience. They think and write in short bursts, not in long forms. They don't read much. These kids are challenging. They are wicked smart, but they are not bookish or contemplative. They have no patience, by and large, for study that seems abstract and of no immediate use. They are as impatient as their age. And why shouldn't they be? The world they are inheriting is one of rapid and almost constant unpredictable change. They are inheriting a world of problems that we no longer have the luxury to ignore and no longer have real time to solve. The challenge, I think, is to meet them somewhere in the middle of who they are and who we are. And for me, the most important part of that is exactly what Graham said on the graduate side, is they need to learn by doing. Our students absolutely need to know why they need to know things. They need to participate in problem solving, and I mean real problem solving right off the bat. Once they have found a problem that they wish to solve, they will learn what they need to know in the work that they need to do to solve it. We need to make sure that every single student we train here has the opportunity to discover the problem that he or she finds the most compelling, and experiential learning outside the traditional classroom is the way to do that. Internship, lab work, study abroad, community service. My vision of the perfect school, and as one I am driven to make UB to be, is a 12-month wraparound experience. Every winter, every summer, a significant, meaningful opportunity to engage in the workforce, to build skills, to find passion, an environment in which we trust our students and we challenge them accordingly. We have to have plans here to raise money so that every single student can participate in experiential learning. I need to support internships. I need to support study abroad. I need to support community engagement, because these are the experiences in which our students learn what they need to know. And once they know what they need to know, then they learn it. They will not sit and read a book if you tell them, well, if you learn the stuff someday, you'll apply it. I don't have a whole lot of luck with that anymore. I have to work differently. So how does this relate to our alumni? It's absolutely critical to our alumni. This is where the alumni help an institution, and the students from an institution work directly with alumni. It is the network that alumni create for us that is the critical link. I tell people here that everything I learned about alumni engagement, I learned at Penn State University, where 1 out of every 5 Pennsylvanians has a Penn State connection. We exploited that network to the moon. We had mid-career folks in all the time in our alumni network, and we didn't ask them for money. We asked them for opportunities for our students. How many students are you going to take? What are they going to do? How are we going to keep track of what they do? It is this kind of network that creates opportunities for our students, and it is also now more critical than ever, because it is in these opportunities that our students learn what they need to know. So really, every time I talk about this, without the alumni, this doesn't work anymore, because it's the link into the workforce, it's the link into the internship, it's the link into the community. Those are the things that actually create education.
Thank you, Robin. Lee?
Okay, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Lee Melvin, and I'm the Vice Provost for Enrollment Management. So I'm going to approach this topic, from the lens of someone who actually is responsible for trying to figure out what 17, 18-year-olds will and will not do. And as many of my colleagues say, I know, yes, that's exactly, we get a lot of pats on the back and shoulders saying, good luck and get some professional help. Because you're relying on a 17 or 18-year-old to make sure you have a living next year. Here's what we're seeing in the enrollment world, and I'm approaching this from a person that's worked at extremely ridiculously highly selective institutions to institutions that really had their admissions criteria posted online. And although they thought they were selective because they were making people wait 8 to 10 weeks to get an admissions decision. But here's what we're learning, and as we think about our students today from enrollment and trying to attract them to your institution and how they approach us and how we approach them. One, we are seeing more and more students are preparing to go to college. They seem to be confident that they want that college experience. We see more students talking about the residential experience. And so that's refreshing in many ways. But what we've learned is that we're one of probably 15 of the schools they're looking at. And how do we get their attention and keep the focus on our institution and that they actually select us? Because it's a cycle. We go after them, they apply, then we have the power while they're waiting for the decision, then we make the decision, we admit them, and then they have the power until May 1st, and then after May 1st, we take the power back to say, yes, we'll decide if we're gonna let you come through. So one thing is we're learning that students are preparing for college. Parents are working with them closely to prepare them for college. And that takes me to my next topic, which is packaging of students. When I think about the parents, we're seeing today that parents control their students' world much closer than what many of us remember when we were going through the college selection process. I say today we admit the family or we deny the family. And when you deny the family, all of their friends come after you. So we have these things that we have to worry about. But parents are packaging their students in different ways. They get better understanding about the system, of what admissions offices are looking for, how do they make their child stand out, so what's the student going to do. And still it comes down to, in the end, it's still their grades, the rigor of their curriculum, yes, their essay, and yes, their college scores. And so those are still the big factors that weigh in this. But parents that have gone through the process and think about their colleagues in colleges and think about their neighbors' children and what's happening there, we're seeing more and more students come through what we call a packaged type of student. And some students, they're so packaged that the parents also make sure that there's errors and mistakes in their college application so they don't stand out too much, so because then they'll say, who wrote this essay, and so we have those type of things. But we are seeing more and more parents package their children to prepare them for the college, for the type of college they'd like to see them attend. And students seem comfortable with allowing their parents to prepare them and package them for that college experience. And then we see what happens once they arrive on our campus. Now, as we're trying to attract those students, we are understanding that there's a great understanding that the students and families are leveraging information more and more today, as you heard here earlier, as they have access to more information. They have access to new tools that give students an opportunity to say, well, what are your chances of being admitted to that institution? Students that are admitted now receive more access on schools' retention and their graduation rates. And when schools make a promise to families, those students expect us to deliver on those promises. So when we tell them we have great faculty, when students arrive here, they expect to be taught by great faculty. But when you place student assistants or teacher assistants in front of students, you get some noise in the system. But this happens across many college campuses. So that's important, like who do we place in front of them, but how they leverage that information to make their experience better here on campus, or they leverage it, really, they become a terror to some campuses because they say, you promised me this and you didn't deliver. But then students use that information to help make change on our campuses. So that's important when we think about the 21st century student. And just a few more here. As we have worked with students in the past, particularly, we could reach out to a student and they would get our brochures and they would continue to consider attending the institution. And now with technology, students have the option to say, I'm going to opt out of receiving your information, or I'll opt in. And so that's made us change how we work with students. It's never a given. And where you say, well, in this environment, we're going to get these students. And so that's changed a lot for us. And students know they have that power to either receive your information or not receive your information. So we're always trying to find ways to get them to either open up our emails or open up our letters that we send to them, read our postcards. So all these things have changed. And really, we've had to send out more print materials so parents can stay in the loop. And so we've seen that change because parents want to stay in the loop. Most parents will say, well, I'm changing his email, his password now. If you can just give me the rest of this information. And we say, well, no, that's not allowed, in our world. And then just a few other things. We are seeing students, yes, they have a strong interest in higher education. Students from all types of backgrounds, from your lower socioeconomic status groups to your higher socioeconomic status groups. We are noticing that more and more students are saying, I deserve that too. I deserve to go to that type of institution. And so as we've seen admissions applications grow at many institutions around the country, there are more students who have heard the message, you too belong in college, you belong at a certain type of college, and that's created more competition. And with that creation of more competition, there's more folks who believe that they are being discriminated against. Never really looking to say, well, who else applied to that institution? And they think, yes, their incredibly smart child should be at institution X. And we find, many students are disappointed because they decided they were going to rank their schools. And so this is my top choice. And we have to figure out where we are in that ranking. And believe it or not, our students are very honest with us when they talk about where we rank on their list. And they say, well, you're number 5, out of my 6 schools, so it's okay. And I hold a session here on campus with faculty and staff to talk about admissions and what's next. And many of our faculty and staff in the room, we ask them, so how's it going and where did your child apply? They will tell us, well, UB's on the list, but you're not high on the list. I said, well, it's only April 3rd. I said, talk to me around April 25th. I said, we have a way of moving up on the list throughout this process. And we do move up quite high on the list. And then finally, what I want to close on is that students really have close family ties, and they rely on their family members. Those are the largest, the biggest influencers. It used to be The college counselor was the biggest influencer, and then the admissions counselor. But families have moved up in that list, and it's fine. And this is where our alumni come in for us. Our alumni are out there displaying their UB colors and their pins and talking to their colleagues about UB, promoting the institution. Students see our alumni, and that's where we have our biggest leverage, because we point to our 200,000 plus alumni in the country and the world. And students see, you talked about the network piece. It's not only their online network, but it's also that public network that they're looking for. And so we've noticed more and more students are interested in how successful are your alumni. And so what our alumni do for us, and as far as their success, their visibility in the communities, their visibility in their work environments, we think that that's changed how we can approach our 21st century students. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Please.
So, I'm the Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and I agree with pretty much everything that's already been said, and much of it, of course, maps straight away to the students that we have in the School of Engineering. The students that we recruit into the undergraduate ranks are without question as idealistic as any generation we've ever seen. They want absolutely to help people and save the planet, which doesn't get more admirable than that. And so it falls to us to make sure that the curriculum that we're offering absolutely maps to those objectives. We have to make it real, as Robin said. We have to make it accessible. We have to give it to them in chunks that are digestible and facilitate them making an impact as quickly as possible, exactly as Graham said. And so how do we think about that? Well, what we think about is that we have to grow and build out our experiential learning opportunities for our students. We have to provide opportunities for them to put into practice quickly what they're learning in the classroom. We have to provide opportunities for them to build, to experiment, to tinker, to engage in entrepreneurship training, to engage in community service. And in the path of doing that, they absolutely have to engage with professionals along the way to understand the human side of how you bring new technologies or solutions to the table to help people and save the planet. There was a great example of this actually happened in the last week. A team from UB won a competition here locally called Erie Hack. And the team of students that won the competition took from the research laboratory where they've been working a technology called underwater Ethernet. And as we were writing the news story for this week, I commented that I don't think most people know that you can't send signals underwater. So the first thing is to point out to people, this is a hard problem. It turns out you can't communicate underwater really easily. I think people think when they've seen movies about submarines communicating to it, pinging that, well, of course you can send signals underwater. But actually, it's really hard to send data underwater. And we've got a wonderful team of researchers working on how do you communicate underwater. And then, so, I'm sure there's people in the audience sitting here thinking, why would I care about communicating underwater? And it's a legitimate question. But it turns out there's about 100 different applications if you can figure out how to communicate underwater. It turns out that you can monitor fish populations, you can monitor algal blooms. Does any of this sound familiar to people that live around the Great Lakes? You can track ships and transport on water bodies, and actually immediately from there it won't take many leaps of imagination before you become involved with military applications. I won't go there, but there's about a big pile of military applications as well. So this team took this technology that they're working on. This is stuff they're working on in the labs. These students took it down to Erie Hack, and they've just won second prize, and I think $15,000 for their efforts, for how can you use this technology to improve the health of the Great Lakes. These students are just completely inspirational to talk to, and they've put an enormous amount of effort into communicating with alums, with faculty, with professionals to figure out how do they take out into the world this actually pretty complicated technology and have other people understand what the value proposition is, how this is going to be helpful. There's no question this has been transformational for them. Absolutely no question. Because They started off with theory. Then they got in a lab and worked with an entirely amazingly diverse group of people from all over the world. They fidgeted around with their hardware. They ran experiments first off in a bowl of water and then in a swimming pool and then in Lake Erie, right? They scaled this thing up. They thought and thought and thought about all the good things they could do with this technology. And now they've gone out and they've won some money, right? So now they can really sense victory, right? They're all really pumped up now. But what we see in that is that progression of I start out by learning something, but then I have to figure out I've got to find a space and some people to play with. I've got to be able to get my hands on the technology and play with it if I'm going to be able to advance it. But all the time I need to be in communication with the real world about what are the problems that I can be solving now that I've got my hammer, where's my nail? So the wraparound that we need to provide here on campus is many-faceted. We have to provide the spaces for the students to play in, and I'm sure many of you have read about maker spaces. You know, we've made a big priority in the last couple of years of building out maker spaces so that the students can get their hands on the equipment they need to build the technologies they want to play with and explore. Coupled with that is making sure that our students are connected all the time to people in the real world, because you always need that reality check. You always need to be talking to people that are out there in the real world about what's feasible, what's not feasible, how do I get from not feasible to feasible. That transition is a big deal. And the other thing, coupled with the maker spaces, is making sure that they have opportunities to engage in entrepreneurship. For many students, there's only a dim understanding when they come to UB, as at I'm sure every other college campus, that training in entrepreneurship is not only for students who plan to own their own businesses, although we absolutely applaud the people that do, it's also to help people understand what it takes to run a business within a large business, how to innovate within a large operation. And so having as many students as possible engage with our entrepreneurship landscape is also tremendously important to us. And again, the alumni are critical, absolutely critical to helping our students get those experiences. We have endless engagement with alums who will give advice to our students about how to build a business plan, how to do a pitch, how to do an elevator presentation, and so on and so on. People that have had experience building businesses are just the most important resource for our students. And of course, ultimately, they turn into connectors, connecting our students with all the things that have already been mentioned, the internships and the jobs, but also in the case of our entrepreneurship students, they're also connecting them with financial resources, which has been a tremendous value as well. Did I have anything that I missed out on? I'll just say one other thing, which touches on the comments that Robin made about the nature of students today. I want to comment on the nature of employers today, which is a bit different. Employers have, in my view, some pretty unrealistic expectations about what a 21-year-old can deliver. And it's not to say, this is not a statement about all 21-year-olds, but not being able to deliver on these things, but it is a good statement about most employers. None of us can remember what it was like to be 21 years old, but I can assure you, you were all clueless. Right? I was too. I was probably more clueless than everyone else in this room. Employers place very unreasonable expectations on 21-year-old graduates, 21, 22-year-old graduates. They expect them to be able to communicate brilliantly, especially complex technical material. They expect them to be entirely responsible and responsive. They expect them to make good decisions at every sort of junction. They expect them to be culturally competent. They expect them to be good in international teams. They expect them to be able to do all of this as well as produce technical material without any on-the-job training. And this is a huge transition. When I joined the workforce, the common statement was that when you employ people, they will be pretty much useless for the first 12 months, and that the company will train them up, and that there will be time allowed for the people that they've hired to develop and grow. The pace of change is such that employers have very low tolerance for on-the-job training, and the stress that it puts on our students as they graduate at that moment of graduation is pretty extreme. These students are under a lot of pressure to perform and perform quickly, knowing that there's no tolerance for you to make mistakes in the organization. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on. How do we keep both sides well enough educated that they both have reasonable expectations going into the marketplace, into the employment marketplace? So one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is working with employers about what can they expect of fresh graduates and what is unrealistic, and help them to understand that we will help them train those students further once they're out in the workforce. So reaching back again to Graham's comment about smaller chunks of information that they can take away in bites, even though they're working full time, is an important part of how we move into the future. So I applaud Graham for bringing that up, because that's a big issue for us.
Good afternoon, everybody. So to give a little bit of reference, I'm a senior here. I'm a biomedical engineer with a Spanish minor. And a couple of things that I have prepared to say, you're going to hear some things that are similar and some things that are original from what's already been said. So I hope you'll take the original as original and things that are similar as not redundant, but an emphasis that there is definitely an agreement across all levels here at UB of what is needed heading into the future. So I asked myself this question multiple times leading up to today about what experiences are important for students, and I'd ask myself and just see multiple times what comes immediately forward. And the two things I'm going to focus on are skills and global and cultural understanding. So in speaking both in hard and soft skills. So in the didactic portion of being a student here at UB, you're going to learn the foundational knowledge. There's just, there's textbooks of information that you need to know foundationally to understand your field. But after moving through all of that, what happens when you don't have the soft skills and the hard skills to match? When an engineer has learned how the body works and has these great ideas for a solution, but in developing a prototype, they're hung up because they can't solder or form a basic circuit. What does it mean for an anthropologist to learn 4 years of methods of understanding cultures and analyzing them when they realize when they get in the field they can't interview properly, they don't communicate well, and therefore cannot learn any new information? These are important things that can sometimes be missed, but are crucial in going concurrently with our learning, our didactic portion of our education at university level. Because one, only do they give us what we need when we head into the field, and hearing that the employer's expectations are unreasonable is, to me, I don't know any different. I don't know what employer expectations used to be, I only know what they are now. So that definitely resonates with the things that I feel students need to know. But doing these skills ahead of time also shows you what you don't like. When you go out into the field as an anthropologist and cultures fascinate you, and then you realize you just don't like talking to people. That's something you want to figure out, before you walk out with your degree, rather than afterwards. Or that these are the things that not only can help you towards your career path, but also make sure it's successful later. So I think these hard and soft skills are the first half of what's pivotal. The second half is the global and cultural understanding. And I thought it was great. This was already in my little notes of things I wanted to say about here on campus with global and cultural understanding, but seeing Vice Miller's keynote address and bringing up the DIF cons, if there's anything I have to shout out as far as that here at UB, it's those. There's been a visible change on campus since Vice Miller's has come here, and I started saying global understanding I was going to talk about today, and I really needed to add in cultural understanding to make that match. So really encourage you all to dig deeper into that. It's great. But it's no longer a buzzword anymore that we are a globalized society, that we're interconnected, that everyone can communicate everywhere across the globe. It's just ubiquitous. Everyone knows it's true. So the thing that remains for success of students is how well a university can execute on delivering that understanding. How well it's not just about understanding cultures to apply solutions or for the good of humanity to save the world. You need that to do that anyway. It's just a reality. The international professor population here doing research reflects that expertise is not specific to a country. It's inherent in the entire world. And so your ability to navigate those cultures and work with them is pivotal in your ability to really find the apex of interdisciplinary knowledge to drive true innovation. So if you don't have an ability, we can only learn cultures as we learn them, but the true key is learning how to learn cultures, how to be familiar with your own biases, with your own ideas, and how to navigate those for the first time. So how do we see that here at the UB experience? Well, it's pivotal. Whether you're in a club, learning your soft skills, learning how to communicate or just interact and lead, whether you are in classes that are driving these projects that are based on real life examples. You may be familiar with the concept of there's 4 different kinds of knowledge. You know what you know what you don't know, you don't know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. And so it's easy to know what you know. I know calculus. I know how to write a paper. But coming to campus, what was more important, and I think is more pivotal to success, is figuring out the things you don't know, and the things you don't know, you don't know. And that obviously applies to the textbooks, to the didactic knowledge. But where it's really been impactful to me has been where it applies to, I didn't know that I knew microaggressions. I didn't know that I knew inherent biases. I didn't know that I didn't know what other religions are like, or the true state of inner city public schools. But these things is what we rely on here to be exposed to. Because if I don't know they exist, I can't address them, I can't try to solve them, I can't know that they're problems that I care about. So the experience you have here at UB provides that, because I can tell you, at least the things that I know now, I can tell you that I know them. So that's kind of proof inherently of what is being provided. But the last bit, that goes cultural understanding, going back to the skills, this is where UB alumni come in. In engineering, we hear a lot from industry, from folks that they'll claim, I think it's almost as a point of pride, I don't understand why, all the stuff you learn in college, you need like 10% of it, which is alarming when I've been studying for several years. But what I figured out finally, 9 days from graduation, is that maybe you don't need, maybe you only need 10% of it, but what you don't know heading in is which 10% you'll need. So, fun game. So this is why we need UB alumni in industry, in research, to bring us into the fold. Show us ahead of time what it means to find that 10%, or what that 10% might be for me, and really narrow in on that. And then furthermore, to support the initiatives here on campus. If you care about what's going on, you care about certain ideas, certain social change, or saving the world, there's probably someone here that cares about it too. But, and usually more than one. There's definitely a lot of people that care about it. But there's only, having the resources then make that known, to take us from our don't know we don't know to knowing what we know, that's the key. Where we put our time, where we put our resources, that's where we really show where we want change to occur. So that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you.
How about it? Yeah. You guys were awesome. Thanks so much. How about some questions from the audience? Like I said, I have a few here that I can follow up on, but I'm sure that they have some thoughts that their thoughts have provoked some thoughts from you. Do we have any questions people want to ask? Yes. Can you hear? Maybe what I'll do is, if you ask the question, okay, we have a mic going around. Okay. Yep. Can you hear me now? Yes.
I appreciated the perspective that you all provided. Lee Jacobs, I think it was good to hear your comments towards the end, because as the panel was speaking, I kept coming back to the point of what do we want, what kind of student do we want, what do we want? We're hearing the perspective in terms of the marketplace, which is appropriate. That's the reality of the world we live in. And in terms of whether, the impact of 21st century technology in terms of shaping the students as they come into the campus. But again, I go back to the comment that Lee made. The 17 and 18-year-olds don't really know what they want in hindsight, or what they need. So in terms of what do we want to create in the students, and obviously experiential learning and helping them to navigate the globalness of the world and the diversity of the world, and being able to have an impact in that way. But I think in terms of what's the UB experience? What makes us unique as UB from your perspective in terms of the kind of students we want to attract and send out into the workplace? Does that make sense?
Go ahead, Liz.
I want to take probably a contrarian view on this, and it's absolutely informed by the fact that I didn't grow up in the US and didn't go through a US university system. I feel that that is fundamentally not the right question to ask, because I feel that it's our job, especially as a public institution, to educate everyone that we possibly can. I was fortunate enough to be admitted to Cornell for an MBA, and I was absolutely startled by the rhetoric around shaping the class and choosing people that fit in. And frankly, I was horrified. I'm like, what is this, groupthink? We want a whole pile of people that think the same? Everybody deserves an education. Everybody deserves the best education they can possibly aspire to, and our job is to take in the biggest diversity of humans we can, meet their aspirations as best we can head on, and give them a chance at what education buys them. I mean, we have, obviously, like any large organization, we take in complete nutters sometimes. Absolute nutters. And sometimes the faculty will come to me and say, we have to do something about this. I'm like, chill, right? Even people that are clearly way over on the boundaries of psychological stability are going to do better in the world when they're well educated. And so I always push back and I say, we're the grown-ups in the room. It's our job to figure out how to help that person manage whatever the heck they're going through to get to the point where they can get an education that will help them succeed in the world. And I know that's contrarian, so I'll be quiet, and I'm sure somebody else has got a much more grown-up view of what the university should attract. But I genuinely, in my heart of heart, believe we shouldn't be building a boundary, we should be a big tent. I feel like everybody that can aspire to education is going to do better in the world if we can get it to them. And so I'm a big tent person.
Add
But
just
of course, Lee's probably trying to shape a class really specifically.
And make sure you have your nutters out there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Bring me up. Well, I mean, but that's it. I just want, no, I said I'd shut up and now I'm not going to.
So much for the moderator.
I know. Somebody should moderate. There's a great example that I'm sure everyone will laugh at when I bring it up, but in engineering, there's a stereotype that we have lots of people that either have Asperger's or they're on the fringes of having Asperger's. When I go to schools and I see teachers dealing with kids with Asperger's in the classroom, or anybody on the autism spectrum, when I say to teachers in particular, make sure this child is stimulated with lots of math and science, because we, in engineering, will find a home for that child. They look at me completely startled, like that's a whole new idea, because like when you're way down in the K through 12 system, you're not necessarily thinking ahead to that, you're dealing with the behavioral issues right there. But it's true. Some of my best friends are Asperger's, right? It is true. We will find a home for those people where they can be productive members of society, and they'll have great lives. Why wouldn't we want to do that? I don't want to weed them out. I want to bring them in.
And I just want to add that this extends pretty dramatically when we think about the mandate to educate the public, which is our mandate, because our assumption is that you get a certain kind of education between the ages of 17 and 22, roughly speaking, which is a more or less general education. Then you get a very specialized education if you go in for a graduate degree between the ages of 22 upwards to lower 20s. But in fact, there is a large social need for ongoing learning well past what we think of as the traditional age of learning. And I think that's a mandate that as a public university we really have to meet.
Right. Here, here.
Thank you very much. Okay, Rich?
These kids who are young and they don't know, and you know, we've got to give them all a chance. And we agree with all that. We've all been at that age. And then we talk about a very short attention span, and we talk about instant gratification, and we talk about because they've got this phone, and all of these things we talk about. And then we talk about a fundamental educational institution, which is all about providing some depth and providing them time to reflect. And unfortunately, that's not about instant gratification. And so when I see these kids come to me at 21, 22 years old. And there's a lot of terrific kids that we get, don't get me wrong, but the ability for a lot of them to communicate, the ability for a lot of them to interact, the ability for a lot of them the school should teach them core analytical skills to be able to look at a problem, develop a hypothesis, and be able to basically communicate that. Understanding they're 22, and we have an accountability to help train and develop them. That's what they're there for. So it's interesting that what you sort of say to me, listening here, it's sort of a couple of different, and there's a paradox here that you're sort of expressing explicitly or implicitly, and as an employer and as someone who wants to engage back with the school, the differentiation of the experience of the school, the ability for employers to get engaged and to provide internships and to get involved on campus as much as you can, and that's an area you don't think about as much. Those are all great ideas, and I think you want to be able to do that. But you raised some other points that I thought were just interesting, and I don't have an answer for them, but the kids really are poor communicators, a lot of them, and unfortunately, I don't care how smart you are, if you cannot communicate, unless you're dealing in some lab, it's really, you're tough.
But if I could just interject right
How
now.
about Robin?
Okay, sorry. This is exactly what I need my students to hear from an employer and not from a professor.
Well, we'll tell
Because
you all
when
day
I
long.
said, no, really, this is it.
This is not unique, what I'm saying.
When I, I'm an English professor too. How we got so heavy in English professors up here, I don't know, but in upper administration. But when I used to teach my kids over and over again, my line to all of my students was, if you can learn how to do this writing thing really well and this communicating thing really well, you will differentiate yourself from every other person out there in the job market. That is a marketable skill. When they heard it from me as the English professor, it never quite held that gravitas. When they went out into the workforce in an internship and realized, one kid really came into my office in tears, the first memo that she'd ever written at her job came back to her with this big red X through it, and basically with a word, with a really insulting sentence on it, basically like, where did you learn to write the English language? This is awful, or something like that. So she came to me after that and said, I really need to learn how to know this, don't I? And I said, yeah, I think you really do. So we went back and went through a series of steps of writing and rewriting and rewriting, but it was that experience that made her realize the depth and importance of just that thing. So when I'm interfacing with alumni and employers that way, that's the reinforcement piece that I think we all need for our students.
Thank you,
It
Robin.
went, yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna get, we have about 8 minutes left, and so I want to try to get as many questions in as we can, and so we have one coming up here, we'll move down, then we'll move up.
Well, I hope this won't be viewed as a provocative question, and if it is, I will withdraw it.
We love controversy.
Well, I've been reading a lot about the Yale hunger strike, which has actually been very significantly underreported, I think, and I'm not interested at all in getting into the question of unionization and the wisdom of a hunger strike, but it does bring up the point that Lee also mentioned of the difficulties of educating today when you have all these senior professors who engage in research, and then you have very, very young people who are barely older than their students teaching so many of the courses. And if one is to believe what the Yale students are saying, they're barely paid a living wage. And so I guess I would just ask the question of how, and maybe it's too complicated to really address. I know Robin has dealt with this to some degree, of how you divide up responsibilities and how you're going to educate all of these students in these many skills that we have been talking about today.
Robin or Lisa, one of you should take this.
I'm happy to jump
Okay.
in really quickly. The School of Engineering basically has no adjunct. This is a question about pay for.
Well, it's basically a question of whether or not.
What are the human resources and how are they
Right, human
deployed?
resources.
Exactly, and how
Okay.
many of them are adjunct and.
Right.
and-
So the
and-
School of Engineering is, when I arrived, we had some adjuncts, not actually that many. I made a move to say we literally will have no adjuncts for whom we are their primary day job. So I only have adjuncts in the School of Engineering who have a day job somewhere else, and they're coming in to teach both because they love teaching and because they have a specialized skill that they've learned in industry that we need to impart to the students. But not one of my adjuncts am I the primary source of money for. they're paid actually at a very respectable rate, in my opinion, for what they're doing as well. That was true before and it's true now, but now we've also made the rule that this can't be anybody's day job, being paid on an ad hoc basis semester by semester. What we have done is build out the teaching faculty ranks. We're at about 15% of the total faculty now are teaching faculty in engineering, which means that their primary job responsibility is to teaching rather than a split between teaching and research and service. And so our goal is to take that up to 20% of the total faculty ranks, and that helps enormously with keeping class sizes reasonable. On top of that, we've got a minimum wage of $15 per hour for all student labor. No, but it all matters, right? It all matters. So we've got a minimum wage position of $15 an hour for all the student employees that we use in the School of Engineering. And we've taken all of the graduate wages up to make sure that we're meeting the sort of minimum wage requirements that are appropriate for Erie County, to make sure that we have nobody on our payroll who shouldn't be able to put a roof over their heads and food on the table. I take this very, very seriously. It's not a sweatshop. Nobody's having a good experience if it's a sweatshop. Not the students, not the faculty, not the TAs, not the SAs. We can't be that institution. And it turns out that happy people are more productive. Who knew?
Okay. We have a question here. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback around on the issue of the workforce, the issue that you raised on the workforce. And if I could add a little bit to that, because I think it's important in terms of how alumni can contribute. So I think the concern that you raise is important about having people come into, students come into your institution, come into institutions and not, these millennials, right? So just to contextualize it, I'm a professor I'm a graduate from UB, and I'm a professor, and I run a pipeline program. So I pipeline a lot of kids here. But I think this alumni contribution issue to create internships is critical. It's critical, and it's also a risk. It's a risk for us, right, to take these students in without these skills, because we put our reputations on the line. But if we don't do that, and then we risk also not having having our students go into the workforce without having those critical skills, and then we risk the reputation of our institution. But I think too, Robin, if you could address maybe the ideas that you have about how to roll out this kind of plan. You know, what are some of the ideas that you have to engage alumni to provide more internships, you know? And maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Or, I mean, there are some alumni that are not going to risk their reputation to do this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But I will tell you that it's a labor of love.
Yep.
Because I've been doing this for 25 years. But it's amazing when you can, I can just tell you this, the students that I have been able to, and I work with the whole unified court system in the state of New York, been able to put into different internships, have all secured legal positions, federal clerkships that they would never have.
Right.
And they're all graduates of UB. But for those internships throughout college that these judges have put their reputations on the line for. So my question is, could you maybe talk a little bit about how you plan to roll that out?
Well, this is, I mean, you know, really, that's a key point to make, is that every employer who takes in an intern, there is a certain amount of risk involved in terms of what, both reputationally for us, if that student fails, and also you don't want someone completely incompetent running around your workforce who is more trouble than they're worth. And everybody who's worked with interns, including myself, knows that interns are labor intensive, that you really do have to spend some time with people, and really they're in a position between employee, like someone, what you just said about the expectations that get ramped up on someone like you, Jake, that are completely different than an intern. So the onus is on us to really create the infrastructure here to prepare them for the internship. And that's in institutions that do this really well, there are these pre-stages for internships. So if you know you're taking your first internship in a summer, say, there will be some pre-course in that spring that will be a professionalization course that will teach you a lot about workforce etiquette, that will put you in front of the right people at the right place at the right time and actually work on your writing skills with you and all these things to try and basically say, here's the ramp up to your very first experience. So you're not just, and I do know a lot of institutions where you just tie a bow on the kid and send the kid out the door, and that's really not what we're Sometimes it really doesn't work real well. The package shows up and it's not what you ordered, and it's like, okay, we don't like that. So there are also internship relationships that you can develop with other institutions. So at Delaware, we had a really great relationship with Smithsonian. So this was an ongoing program where we had a specific application process, vetted the students, took in writing samples, worked with the Smithsonian closely, gave them a pool, let them pick. So all these things are possible from a both and kind of perspective. And when you give kids the kind of ramp up, then there's way more skin in the game for the internship for the kid. The kid really has a much better sense of, I'm not just getting sent for a job. This is a professional opportunity that I need to take seriously. So that would be very much part of my plan as we scale this up.
Thank you, Robin. Listen, it's 3 o'clock, but if you're willing to sit for another 5 minutes or so, I wanted to take another question, but if you guys want to, okay, we'll go here, and then we'll try to get to that one, okay? Just based on where I saw the arms go up first and been waiting patiently. I know everybody has been.
So thank you to the panel for sharing all these different perspectives from graduate students, undergraduate, and
Maybe we can make
students
that.
as well. So my question is, what is the one piece of advice you'll give to an incoming freshman or a new graduate student on what best to do to embrace changes in the 21st century after you graduate? When students come to me to ask me, I said, okay, engage with alumni because that's what I do. But, what would you say as your one piece of advice?
So I'm going to have our student, Jake, who's done a tremendous number of these experiences, to answer that question. On the ground floor.
Sure. So when students ask, I give tours, I go to open houses, and I try to impart what I can. And when I think about this, changing for the world is when they first get here, when they first arrive, I told them to sign up for an email listserv for anything that remotely interests them, even a little bit. And even some of the stuff that sounds a little weird, but at the orientation they had like candy at the table, so you took the candy and signed your name anyway. Because if you're not aware of everything that's out there, you can't possibly dismiss it or accept it, and you don't know what's worth dismissing and what's worth accepting. So that's my one piece of advice, and it's better here at UB with its size than so many other schools because it's all here. Hundreds of clubs, all kinds of internships, every school, major, minor that you ever want in your life. It's all here. But you need to be willing to dive into it wholeheartedly. Don't let its size scare you. Absorb it, and then later you can decide, okay, we'll step away from these and really and focus on this. Because then you'll know you've had a good look at where you think your niche to change the world is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Last question.
Yes, first of all, I think to Jacob, I think on behalf of everybody, very impressive young man for a senior. I mean, amazing. Amazing. My question is to Lee. I'm curious, I know you worked at Cornell before, now you're here. I'm curious about the differentiation between admissions, acceptance rates, and the differences in the people that you see applying to the schools. If you comment on the differences between the two schools, I'd be interested in that. Especially, I've got a daughter that's a sophomore, so very interested in this topic. So in high school, sophomore in high school. Thank you.
Okay, sure, and I'm happy to address that. And also, from the last question, I think when we're talking to students, and like your daughter as well, that may be coming through when they ask us for advice, I tell students, when you're filling out the application and you've enrolled at your institution, whatever you do, from those boxes that you checked, don't stay in those boxes. Yeah. That's what we ask them to do. And we tell them to really explore and try to understand the institution and all it has to offer, and don't be constrained because you checked the box. When we look at our students both at Cornell and let's say UB, we have the students we admit usually through our honors program are usually students that are also being considered by Cornell and other highly selective institutions. So that's a certain group that we have that's designed for what we would say they've had high test scores, high GPAs, or they've done very well in their curriculum. And those are the big parts, with those. What I see is we'll have some students that have very high test scores, high GPA, great curriculum, great community service, and still our honors program will say, well, but we don't think we're ready to select you for the honors. And it all comes down to selection. And many students, and I've faced this at Cornell, several students that were eligible just on GPA and test scores to be admitted to the institution, but they were not selected. And that's the big change of our students that we see today is people have a hard time when someone says no to you or they deny you a service. And so, and it's very difficult for parents to hear that someone said no to their child. And so, but what we see is students are preparing, even at Cornell, like when I talk about the packaging, and with my Ivy colleagues, when we would sit around, the deans would meet and talk about, what we're seeing in the enrollment trends. We would tell students, ourselves, not our students, because we couldn't say that out in front of the public, but we would say, if I see one more student that flew down to country X and built a house, I'm not going to admit anybody, and so because what we're looking for, and even at UB, and as we think about scholarships, is did the student initiate some of this? Did they grow from it? And if they didn't, actually owning up to, I was fortunate that my parents allowed me, had the finances to get me to do X, and that's not a bad thing. Because it's not bad to, if you're from a wealthy family or you're from a lower income family, and both are trying to help communities. And so, and what schools are looking for is not just the leadership, it's also the community piece. We look for that. We look for that when we award scholarships, because our scholarships are not just about the GPA and the test score. Yes, we want to improve our test scores. The Ivy Leagues, they want to continue to improve their test score. To do that, you have to reduce your admit rate, so we did that. But we also have the mandate to grow diversity enrollment, to grow gender and make sure there's balance there, to grow geographic enrollment. And then they tell you don't let the test scores drop against this backdrop of what's happening in our country. So as students are preparing, I tell them do your best work, take the most rigorous curriculum, sign up for classes where you really need a challenge, and there are some classes where you shouldn't be in those classes, because if you say I'm in AP Calculus, I made a B, but if I had taken regular calculus, I would have made an A. And we would go back and say, well, there were other people in that AP Calculus that made an A as well. So where did you fall short? And so I think schools are looking, particularly when highly selective pieces come in, it's like when people, do they know themselves? And then the last piece of advice there is when the student is filling out the application, you need to look and see, do the dots connect from the recommendation letters and what you're seeing, the content of that, the student's essay, that content, the student's curriculum, the student's services to their community, their leadership work. And then we get to the family part where, okay, who are your parents? What do they do? And then because we read a lot into what the parents' professions are. So there's a lot of pieces, but it is connecting those dots throughout the entire application process.
Thank you so much. You guys have been a terrific audience. How about a round of applause, and thank you for our applause.